Now let's bring it back home, back to North America, back to the United States. And what we're seeing is the same thing. It's always the same thing. If we want to understand these complex issues, what we want to do is we want to break them down to what we call like a first principles level. It means you have to understand them at their core basic truths. And if you understand them on that level, then you can start to then formulate your own ideas and hypotheses based off of that. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you're just parroting or repeating headlines, right, without actually understanding the thing. And so if we want to break this down to a first principles level, the first principles level is if I want to control you, if I want to control a situation, control another person, then I have to give them my perspective or my narrative, my truth. You have to live my truth. If you can think for yourself, if you could get other outside information, you might not agree with what I'm telling you. So that's the first principles. And so if you understand that to be true, then you understand that in order for a government, especially a very corrupt and coercive government, has to control the narrative in order to control power. The problem that they have is that as we go farther along from the founding of the United States until today, the government is getting more and more corrupt at a very rapid rate, at an exponential rate. And as they get more corrupt, the people like it less and less and less, obviously. When you still a little bit, you favor yourself a little bit, you have a little bit of outside favors, okay, like whatever, sure, okay, I see it. But the more and more it gets, the more egregious it gets, the higher dollar amounts it gets, the worse it gets for us, the more the people don't like it. The more that people don't like it, the more that we're going to want to talk about it and push back against it. The more that we talk about it and push back against it, the more they have to censor us. Are you starting to understand the situation? This is not just like some random thing. It's the way it has to be. If we have a government that's getting more corrupt, and if the government wants to stay in power, if the government's getting more corrupt, and if the government wants to stay in power, which of course they do, then they have to control the narrative. That's just it. This is the way it works. Otherwise, they're out, right? Now, let's talk about some of the broader implications here. Civil liberties and democracy at stake. Let's talk about democracy at stake. I have a different lens and viewpoint on democracy. We'll talk about it here in a minute that you maybe won't like, or maybe you'll like it if I explain it to you, but it might catch you off guard. But if we go back to the United States, we saw that in 2001, we had the 9/11 bombings. The trade centers got knocked down. Every year we sort of celebrate this as a moment to remember the solidarity of the United States in response to this and blah, 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 blah. What I remember is it was the day that Americans lost more freedom than any time in history. That's what happened. Through the events of September 11, as Americans, we lost more freedom than any time in history through the passing of the Patriot Act. Of course, all these bills always have a name that's the opposite of what they are. Like Biden's famous Inflation Reduction Act, by spending an extra $1.7 trillion, somehow that cures inflation. It's insane. And just like this, the Patriot Act is the opposite of a Patriot Act. It's the totalitarian act. That's what they should have called it. And under the Patriot Act and then other government actions, they've basically given themselves complete power to restrict and censor any issues that they want. They can basically see everything. They can do everything. It was passed directly after the 9/11 attacks, less than a month afterwards. So anytime you see the government rushing into making these decisions, it's probably a bad thing. They didn't take the time to think about it. They didn't take the time to weigh the pros and cons, look at the cost-benefit analysis. They didn't take the time to get public opinion. We're supposed to have a representative government. So we elect leaders to go represent us, but they didn't get a chance to look through these laws and to vote on these laws. That's always going to be a bad thing, right? You should know by now, if you're a responsible adult, that you want to think before you speak. You want to think before you act. You want to look before you jump. And so something as massive and as powerful and as important as this should have probably taken some time. Unless maybe they had put it in place before and just used it as a place to put in power. But that's a whole different talk. Now, what we know is that the act gave the government, like I said, these massive powers to surveil everybody, power to wiretap phones and all these things. It changed the definition of what terrorism is, which now makes it easy for the government to prosecute anybody they want under terrorism-related crimes. It's been super controversial, of course, because, again, it's taken away so much freedoms. It violates civil liberties. It's been used to target all types of minority groups. Of course, the government argues that it's important to protect the country. Remember, you have to give up your freedom for the safety. It's important that you let us take these freedoms from you so we can give you the safety that you want, according to them. But we've seen that this Patriot Act has been used to prosecute hundreds and hundreds of crimes that they say are terrorism related, but maybe not. Like, for example, used to prosecute protesters and journalists, for example. Now, this has been challenged many times in court, but the Supreme Court seems to always hold up the law over and over and over. However, the Patriot Act is set to expire, and Congress is debating whether to reauthorize the law or to let it expire. We'll see what happens. But, of course, they don't want to let it expire. Remember, if we understand these things from a first principles level, they don't want to let it go. And we just saw this week, Senator Elizabeth Warren, every time I say her name, I think about how Trump called her Pocahontas. Senator Elizabeth Warren pretended to be an American Indian, a Native Indian, and she said that she was a Native Indian, she was from some tribe, and it all was a big lie. So anyway, that's the joke behind that. But anyway, of course, her she's probably at the forefront of trying to take away your freedom, specifically around your freedom of money, specifically around freedom to transact in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And what we saw this week under the guise of war, because of the Israel-Hamas thing that's going on, is there was an article that came out that said that Hamas was using cryptocurrency to cause war. And so she used this report to go, rattle the sabers, if you will, to rally the troops. And she got 100 legislators to write a letter to the White House addressing concerns over crypto's role in terrorism, and to rush through, again, another rush through a new bill that would have sweeping power that would allow them to sanction and impose sanctions and basically ban technologies that they think could be a threat to national security. Now, they did this off of a report that had come out that has since been found to actually be false. And actually, they cite data from a company called Elliptical, which has actually come out and said, wait a minute, the data that you're saying that we gave you is wrong. That's not the case. I forget the exact numbers. I think they said something about it was $90 million or $130 million in crypto donations that they had gotten. But the funny thing is that actually there was a report from Hamas months earlier, saying, do not give us crypto donations. Do not give us Bitcoin donations because they're being able to be tracked. So it was a blatant lie. The data company said this is not the right data. Hamas put out a statement saying don't give it to us, and yet they ran with this anyway. So they're pushing false misinformation. We know the information is false because both people that are reported in this information have come out and said so, and they're using it to now rush through a law to put more laws in place to take away your freedom to transact under the guise of protecting your freedom and using the Patriot Act for this. See how that works? It's a big deal. Now, we can stand by and let this all happen, or we can stand up and do something. What would you do about it? Well, I'm encouraging you to stay involved, to stay informed. I would like you to go spread these. Go talk about these with your friends, your families, your coworkers. Call your local lawmakers. Let them know how you feel. And when it comes to the ballots, vote them out.